The handmade photo album hit the marble floor with a sickening crack, 20 years of memories scattering like my shattered heart. Worthless. Dad spat his designer shoes, crushing my birthday gift. Just like everything else you do. The room fell silent as champagne glasses froze mid-air, and my step-family smirked. That night, I vanished from their perfect world. What they discovered 6 months later about their missing daughter would destroy everything they thought they knew about family money and the quiet girl they underestimated. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you are ready for some serious family drama, and subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you will want to see how this plays out. My name is Seraphina Walsh, and I had always been the ghost in my own family. While my stepsister Madison got designer handbags for breathing, I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. While my stepbrother Trevor received a brand new BMW for his 16th birthday, I rode the bus everywhere. Dad remarried when I was 12, and suddenly I became invisible in my own home. The night of my 21st birthday party was supposed to be different. I had spent months creating a photo album documenting our family history, including pictures of Dad and me from before the divorce, hoping to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I saved every penny from my barista job to have it professionally bound. It was my piece offering my desperate attempt to matter. But when I presented it during the toast, Dad's face darkened. "What is this garbage?" he sneered, throwing it down, the binding split photos spilling across the floor. "You embarrass me, Seraphina. Always have. Why can you not be more like Madison? She has class, ambition, a future. You are just worthless." The guests, his business partners, golf buddies, my stepfamily, watched in stunned silence. Some looked away uncomfortably, others barely hid their amusement. Madison filmed it on her phone, giggling. My stepmother Linda just sipped her wine, unmoved. That night, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and left. I withdrew my savings, $3,000 I had scraped together, and drove to my Aunt Ruby in Portland. Ruby was Dad's estranged sister, the family rebel who had been cut off years ago for questioning his business practices. "Honey," Ruby said when I showed up on her doorstep at 3 a.m, mascara streaked and broken. "I have been waiting for this call for years." Over coffee and pancakes, Ruby told me things about my father I had never known. How he had built his construction empire through shady dealings. How he had cheated partners out of their shares. How he had manipulated contracts and bribed city officials. Most shocking of all, how he had stolen the insurance money from my mother's death. Money that should have been mine. "Your mother had a life insurance policy worth $500,000, Ruby explained, showing me documents she had secretly copied years ago. "She named you as the sole beneficiary when she got sick. Your father was supposed to hold it in trust until you turned 21. Instead, he used it to fund his wedding to Linda and buy their mansion." My hands shook as I read the papers. All those years of struggling, working multiple jobs, eating ramen noodles while they lived in luxury. It was all built on money that rightfully belonged to me. Money from my mother's sacrifice. "Why did you never tell me?" I whispered. "I tried, sweetheart. Your father threatened to have me arrested for harassment if I contacted you. He had the lawyers, the connections. I was just a retired teacher with no power. But now you are 21. Now you have legal standing." Ruby had more than just insurance documents. She had kept meticulous records of Dad's business dealings, photographs of meetings with city officials, recorded phone conversations where he bragged about bribing inspectors. She had been building a case for years, waiting for the right moment. "He destroyed my marriage to your uncle, cost me my relationship with you, and turned the whole family against me." Ruby said, her eyes hard with years of suppressed anger. But karma is patient, Seraphina, and sometimes karma needs a little help. That first week in Portland, I discovered the extent of Dad's empire built on corruption. Walsh Construction had monopolized city contracts through bribes. Buildings had been constructed with substandard materials, while Dad pocketed the difference. Safety inspections had been falsified. Workers had been cheated out of overtime pay and benefits. The most damning evidence was a ledger Ruby had photographed during a family gathering years ago. It detailed every bribe, every falsified document, every stolen dollar. Dad had been so arrogant, so certain of his untouchability, that he kept detailed records of his crimes like trophies. But the insurance money was just the beginning. Ruby showed me bank statements proving that Dad had been embezzling from his business partners for decades. He had created shell companies to funnel money into personal accounts. He had claimed tax deductions for charitable donations that never happened, with Linda's jewelry collection serving as evidence of where that money really went. Madison's car, Trevor's college tuition, Linda's shopping sprees, their annual European vacations. All of it paid for with stolen money. Ruby explained. Money from insurance fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and bribery. They have been living a lie built on other people's suffering. As I sat in Ruby's small apartment, surrounded by evidence of my father's crimes, something hardened inside me. This was not just about the birthday humiliation anymore. This was about justice for everyone he had hurt. This was about recovering my mother's money and exposing the truth about the Walsh family fortune. I spent the next month learning everything I could about financial fraud investigation, legal procedures, and media relations. Ruby introduced me to contacts she had cultivated over the years. Journalists, investigators, and lawyers who had been waiting for someone with standing to come forward. The plan began to take shape. We would not just expose Dad's crimes. We would dismantle his entire empire piece by piece. We would recover the stolen insurance money and ensure that every victim of his schemes received justice. Most importantly, we would show the world who the real worthless person in the family was. But first, I needed to disappear completely. Dad had to believe that his cruel words had broken me, that I had slunk away in shame, never to return. He needed to feel safe, untouchable, while we built our case. He needed to continue his criminal activities, creating more evidence while we prepared to destroy everything he had built on lies and stolen money. The girl who left that birthday party crying was gone forever. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that the best revenge is not served hot. It is served with legal documents, federal investigators, and front-page news coverage. 3 months into my disappearance, I had transformed from broken daughter into methodical investigator. Working with Ruby and our growing network of contacts, we had assembled enough evidence to bring down a small government. But I wanted more than just Dad's arrest. I wanted complete exposure, public humiliation, and the total collapse of everything he held dear. My opportunity came when Madison posted on social media about their upcoming anniversary party for Dad and Linda. Celebrating 15 years of the perfect marriage and 20 years of Walsh Construction success, she captioned, posing next to the marble fountain in their backyard. The party would host 200 guests, including city officials, business partners, and social elite who had helped Dad build his corrupt empire. Perfect. I spent weeks planning the most spectacular public exposure in our city's history. Ruby connected me with investigative journalist Marcus Rivera from Channel 7 News, who had been investigating construction corruption for years without enough evidence to break the story. We also brought in federal agent Sarah Chen. She had been building a case against Dad, but needed an inside source. This anniversary party is our golden opportunity, I explained during our final planning meeting in Ruby's living room. Everyone who enabled Dad's corruption will be there. We expose everything simultaneously. The insurance fraud, the embezzlement, the bribery, the tax evasion. Maximum impact, maximum witnesses. Agent Chen reviewed our evidence with barely contained excitement. This is the most comprehensive fraud case I have seen in 15 years. We have bank records, recorded conversations, photographs, falsified documents, witness testimonies. Your father has been sloppy because he felt untouchable. Marcus had prepared a special news segment for the night of the party. We will broadcast live from outside the Walsh mansion while federal agents serve warrants. The timing will be perfect. Right as they are toasting their success, the world will learn the truth about how that success was built. But I had an even better plan. I would attend the party myself. Ruby initially opposed this idea. Seraphina, it is too dangerous. If he realizes you have been investigating him, he will not realize anything, I assured her. Dad thinks he broke me. In his mind, I am somewhere feeling sorry for myself, probably working minimum wage jobs and regretting challenging him. His arrogance is our greatest weapon. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Professional styling gave me a completely new look. Sleek blonde hair instead of my natural brown sophisticated makeup, and a designer dress that cost more than my old monthly rent. I looked like Madison, which was exactly the point. The night of the party, I walked through the front door like I belonged there. Dad was holding court near the bar, regaling his business partners with stories about his latest achievements. Linda glided between guests in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Madison and Trevor played the perfect children, charming everyone with practiced ease. I positioned myself strategically near the main group, close enough to hear, but far enough to avoid immediate recognition. The irony was delicious. They were literally celebrating the crimes we were about to expose. To another year of unprecedented success, Dad announced, raising his crystal glass. Walsh Construction continues to secure the most lucrative city contracts because we deliver quality and value. The guests applauded, unaware that quality and value meant bribed inspectors and substandard materials. City Councilman Rodriguez smiled and nodded, probably calculating his next kickback. Planning Commissioner Williams laughed at Dad's jokes, conveniently forgetting the envelope of cash he accepted monthly. At exactly 9:30, my phone buzzed with Marcus's text. Federal agents are moving in. Are you ready? I walked calmly to the center of the room and cleared my throat. Excuse me, everyone. Before we continue celebrating, I think there are some things you should know about the guest of honor. The room fell silent. Dad's face drained of color as he finally recognized me. Seraphina, what are you doing here? How did you even get past security? Security? You mean the same security company you used to intimidate witnesses and destroy evidence? I pulled out a folder containing copies of our most damning documents. I think your guests would be very interested to learn how you really afford this lifestyle. Linda stepped forward, her face twisted with rage. How dare you embarrass us at our own party? Security! Remove this person immediately! Actually, they might be too busy with the federal agents surrounding this house right now, I replied, enjoying the growing panic in her eyes. That was Marcus's cue. The massive television in the living room suddenly switched from the party playlist to Channel 7 News. Marcus appeared on screen, standing outside their front gate, with the Walsh mansion clearly visible behind him. Good evening. I am Marcus Rivera, reporting live from what might be the most dramatic arrest in our city's history. Federal agents are currently serving warrants at the home of prominent businessman Richard Walsh, following an extensive investigation into fraud, bribery, and embezzlement spanning 2 decades. Chaos erupted. Guests looked around frantically, some heading for exits only to find federal agents blocking every door. City officials who had been laughing moments before now looked terrified, probably calculating their own legal exposure. Business partners who had profited from Dad's schemes began distancing themselves, claiming ignorance. Dad lunged toward me, his face purple with rage. You ungrateful little... Ungrateful! I interrupted, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Should I be grateful that you stole my mother's life insurance money to pay for Linda's jewelry collection? Should I thank you for bribing city officials while honest contractors went bankrupt? Should I appreciate how you built this empire on the graves of workers who died because you used substandard materials to save money? Agent Chen and her team entered through the main doors, badges displayed, and handcuffs ready. Richard Walsh, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, embezzlement, bribery of public officials, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The television continued broadcasting Marcus detailing each crime while our carefully leaked evidence appeared on screen. Bank records showing the insurance money transfer, photographs of cash handoffs to city officials, audio recordings of Dad bragging about his schemes, financial documents proving years of embezzlement and fraud. The investigation was spearheaded by the victim's own daughter, Marcus continued, who discovered evidence that her father had stolen her deceased mother's insurance money to fund his lifestyle while she struggled through college working multiple jobs. Linda collapsed into a chair, the reality of their situation finally penetrating her privileged bubble. Madison stood frozen, her phone hanging limply in her hand, instead of recording this time. Trevor tried to slip away, but found federal agents blocking his path. "This is impossible," Dad sputtered as Agent Chen read him his rights. "I am Richard Walsh. I own half this city. You cannot do this to me." "Actually, we can, and we are," Agent Chen replied calmly. "Your daughter provided evidence of crimes dating back 20 years. You made this easy by keeping detailed records of your criminal activities." As federal agents led my father away in handcuffs, I felt something I had not experienced in years: complete satisfaction. The man who called me worthless was being arrested in front of everyone whose opinion he valued, his crimes broadcast live across the city, his empire crumbling with each passing moment. But this was just the beginning. The arrest was only the opening move. Within 24 hours, the Walsh empire began collapsing like a house of cards, and I discovered that Dad had made enemies everywhere. As news of his arrest spread, victims emerged from the shadows, ready to join my war against everything he represented. Ruby's apartment became our unofficial headquarters. Federal agents had seized the mansion Linda was staying with her sister, and Madison and Trevor were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Meanwhile, I was building an army of allies who had been waiting years for this moment. The first major addition to our team was Elena Santos, a former Walsh construction employee who had been blacklisted from the industry after reporting safety violations. Elena arrived at Ruby's with boxes of evidence she had secretly copied before Dad fired her.
"Your father destroyed my career because I would not stay quiet about corner cutting that was killing workers,"
Elena explained, spreading blueprints across Ruby's dining table. "These buildings should have been condemned years ago. Instead, he bribed inspectors to look the other way." Elena's evidence was devastating. She had photographs of structural defects, emails discussing bribes to safety inspectors, and records showing how Dad had systematically intimidated whistleblowers. Her documentation proved that at least 3 construction accidents, including 1 fatality, could be directly traced to Dad's cost-cutting measures. "I lost everything fighting him," Elena continued. "My job, my reputation, my savings. Other contractors would not hire me because your father spread lies about my work. I had to leave the industry entirely." Elena was not alone. Over the next week, a parade of Dad's victims made contact. There was Thomas Kumar, a small contractor who had been forced into bankruptcy when Dad stole his designs and underbid his projects using inside information. Maria Rodriguez, whose husband died when faulty materials Dad substituted caused a scaffold collapse and who had been fighting for justice ever since. Most importantly, we connected with James Morrison, Dad's former business partner who had been cheated out of his share of Walsh Construction 15 years ago. "Richard was supposed to buy me out for $2 million when I retired," James explained during our meeting at a downtown coffee shop. "Instead, he manipulated the books to show the company was worth far less, then forced me to accept $800,000. 6 months later, he landed the City Hall renovation contract, the biggest deal in our history. James had his own evidence collection, including original partnership agreements, financial statements showing the real value of the company, and communications proving Dad had deliberately hidden profitable contracts during their negotiations. More importantly, James still had legal standing to challenge the fraudulent buyout. I spent my retirement years watching him get rich off what should have been my work, James said, his voice bitter with years of suppressed anger. My wife died believing we had failed, that we had not saved enough money for her medical treatments. Meanwhile, Richard was buying yachts and European vacations with money he stole from me. Each new ally brought additional evidence and connections. Through Elena, we reached construction workers who had been cheated out of wages. Through Maria, we contacted families of other workers injured by Dad's negligent practices. Through James, we gained access to early financial records that proved Dad had been committing fraud from the very beginning of his success. Marcus Rivera orchestrated our media campaign brilliantly. Each day brought new revelations, new victims coming forward, new evidence of corruption. The story dominated local news and began attracting national attention. Cable news shows were analyzing Dad's case as an example of systemic corruption in local government. The Walsh construction scandal has exposed a web of corruption involving city officials, planning commissioners, and safety inspectors, Marcus reported during his evening segment. Sources indicate that federal investigators have identified at least 12 public officials who received regular payments in exchange for favorable treatment. Social media amplified our impact. Elena started a Facebook group called Walsh Construction Victims United that grew to over 3,000 members within a week. Former employees shared stories of workplace intimidation and wage theft. Residents of buildings constructed by Walsh Construction posted photographs of structural problems and safety hazards. Madison and Trevor tried fighting back on social media, claiming Dad was innocent and the victims were lying for attention. Their efforts backfired spectacularly when Elena posted documentation proving their college tuitions had been paid directly from accounts containing embezzled money. These privileged kids are defending corruption because they benefited from it, Elena wrote in a post that went viral. While their father was stealing wages from construction workers, they were using that stolen money for luxury cars and designer clothes. Linda hired expensive lawyers and tried limiting the damage to her reputation. She claimed ignorance about Dad's business practices and filed for divorce, hoping to protect her assets. However, our evidence proved she had been actively involved in money laundering through fake charity donations and had personally benefited from the insurance fraud. Our alliance grew stronger as we uncovered the true scope of Dad's crimes. Federal investigators were amazed by the quality and quantity of evidence we provided. Agent Chen told us it was one of the most comprehensive criminal cases she had ever seen. Your father's arrogance worked against him, she explained during one of our coordination meetings. He kept detailed records because he thought he was untouchable. Now those records are destroying him. The breakthrough came when James Morrison discovered something that changed everything. Dad's crimes were still ongoing. Despite being out on bail, Dad was attempting to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. He contacted me yesterday. James revealed, his voice shaking with anger. He offered to finally pay me what he owed, plus interest, if I would recant my statements to federal investigators. When I refused, he threatened to have me audited by the IRS. Elena received similar threats. Anonymous callers warned her to stop talking to reporters or face consequences. Someone broke into her apartment and ransacked her files, though they found nothing since she had already turned everything over to authorities. This was the moment I realized Dad still saw us as obstacles to be removed rather than opponents to be respected. Even facing federal charges, he believed he could intimidate his way out of consequences, just like he had for 20 years. He is not going to stop until we stop him completely, I told our group during an emergency meeting. Jail time is not enough. We need to ensure he loses everything: his money, his properties, his reputation, his power to hurt people. Elena suggested we expand our civil lawsuit to include Linda Madison and Trevor as co-defendants. They knowingly benefited from criminal proceeds for years. They should not be allowed to keep stolen money just because they were not directly involved in stealing it. James agreed enthusiastically. Recovery of criminal proceeds should include everything purchased with stolen money: the house, the cars, the jewelry, the college tuitions, the vacation homes. All of it should be liquidated to compensate victims. Our legal team, led by attorney David Kim, who was working pro bono due to personal experience with Dad's corruption, confirmed this strategy was viable. Civil asset forfeiture laws allow us to seize anything purchased with criminal proceeds. If we can prove that their lifestyle was funded by fraud and embezzlement, we can take it all. As we prepared for this expanded legal assault, I felt the satisfaction of watching Dad's world crumble piece by piece. His business was defunct. His reputation destroyed, his family scattered. City contracts were being audited, officials were resigning in disgrace, and victims were finally getting their voices heard. But Dad still had fight left in him, connections we had not anticipated, and resources hidden beyond our reach. The man who had built an empire through corruption and intimidation was not going to surrender without using every dirty trick he had learned over 20 years of crime. Our alliance was about to be tested in ways none of us anticipated. Someone close to us was not who they seemed, and Dad's counterattack would nearly destroy everything we had worked so hard to build. The real war was just beginning. Just when victory seemed certain, everything collapsed in the most devastating way possible. The betrayal came from the person I trusted most, and it nearly destroyed everything we had built together. 3 weeks after our alliance had grown to include dozens of victims and witnesses, James Morrison requested an urgent private meeting. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup and avoiding eye contact. "Seraphina, I need to tell you something important," he began, his voice strained. "Your father contacted me again. This time, he made an offer I cannot refuse." My blood ran cold. "What kind of offer?" "He is willing to pay me $5 million, more than double what he originally stole, if I recant my testimony and convince you to drop the civil lawsuit." James looked up, his eyes filled with guilt and desperation. "My granddaughter needs surgery for her heart condition. The insurance will not cover it. This money could save her life." I stared at him in disbelief. "James, you cannot seriously be considering this. Dad is manipulating you. He investigated your family to find your weakness." "I know what he is doing," James replied, his voice breaking. "But I cannot let my granddaughter die because of pride. She is only 7 years old, Seraphina. What would you do if it were your child?" Before I could respond, Elena burst into the coffee shop, her face pale with panic. "We have a massive problem. Someone leaked our strategy documents to Walsh's lawyers. They know everything: our witness list, our evidence timeline, our legal tactics." My stomach dropped. The leaked documents contained confidential information that only our core team possessed. Someone in our inner circle had betrayed us, but I never imagined it would be James. "It was you," I whispered, watching his face crumble with shame. "You gave them our files." "He said he only needed to know what evidence you had so he could prepare his defense," James stammered. I thought it would not hurt anything. I was wrong." Elena's phone rang. It was our attorney, David Kim, and his news was catastrophic. "They have filed for dismissal of all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct," David explained, his voice tight with anger. "They claim the evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance and witness tampering. Worse, they have convinced 3 key witnesses to recant their statements." The dominoes fell quickly after that. Thomas Kumar, the contractor who had been bankrupted by Dad's schemes, suddenly withdrew from our lawsuit, claiming he had misremembered events from years ago. Maria Rodriguez, the widow fighting for justice after her husband's death, stopped returning our calls after receiving what she described as a very generous settlement offer. Most devastating of all, Elena discovered that her former co-workers at Walsh Construction had been systematically bought off or threatened into silence. The workers who had been documenting safety violations suddenly claimed they had no knowledge of any problems. "It is like watching our case evaporate in real time," Elena said during our emergency meeting at Ruby's apartment. "Every piece of evidence we thought was solid is being undermined or discredited. Dad's counterattack was brilliant and ruthless. His lawyers argued that I had orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to frame an innocent businessman motivated by childhood resentment and greed. They painted our alliance as a group of disgruntled former employees and opportunistic liars seeking financial gain." The media narrative began shifting in Dad's favor. His public relations team, hired with money stolen from victims, launched a campaign portraying him as a successful businessman being destroyed by false accusations from a troubled daughter seeking revenge. Madison and Trevor appeared on local television, tearfully defending their father and claiming I had always been jealous of their success. Linda gave interviews describing me as a disturbed young woman who had threatened the family and disappeared for months before launching these vindictive lies. "My husband worked hard to build his business from nothing," Linda told Channel 7 News, the same station that had initially supported our investigation. "Now his own daughter is destroying his reputation with fabricated evidence and coached witnesses." Federal prosecutors began questioning the strength of their case. Agent Chen warned us that Dad's legal team was building reasonable doubt by attacking our credibility and motives. "The insurance fraud is still solid," she explained during a tense meeting at the federal building. "But the bribery and embezzlement charges are becoming harder to prove without witness testimony. His lawyers are very good at what they do." Marcus Rivera's support wavered as his editors pressured him to present both sides of the story. The powerful families and business interests that Dad had cultivated over 20 years were applying pressure through advertising threats and political connections. "I believe you completely," Marcus assured me during a private conversation. "But I am being forced to balance coverage or risk losing my job. There are powerful people who want this story to disappear." The breaking point came when Ruby received a visit from two men claiming to be insurance investigators. They questioned her about harboring me and suggested she could face charges as an accessory if she continued supporting my false claims. "They knew things about my past, about my finances, about my medical history," Ruby told me, shaking with fear. "These were not insurance investigators, sweetheart. Your father sent them to intimidate me." That night, someone vandalized Ruby's car and left threatening notes in her mailbox. Elena found dead rats in her apartment hallway. David Kim discovered that his law license was being reviewed by the State Bar Association following anonymous complaints about his conduct. James Morrison delivered the final blow during a phone call that left me shattered. "I am sorry, Seraphina, but I am officially withdrawing from the lawsuit and recanting all my statements," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Your father made it clear that my granddaughter's safety depends on my cooperation. I cannot sacrifice her life for justice." As I hung up the phone, I realized Dad had systematically dismantled our alliance using the same tactics that had made him successful for decades: intimidation, bribery, and exploiting people's vulnerabilities. He had turned our greatest strength, the network of victims seeking justice, into our greatest weakness by making each person choose between their principles and their survival. Sitting in Ruby's living room, surrounded by the remnants of our once powerful coalition, I felt the same crushing defeat I had experienced on my birthday. Dad had proven once again that money and power could overcome truth and justice. He had shown that even when his crimes were exposed, he could still destroy anyone who dared to challenge him. But in the depths of that despair, I remembered something important. I was no longer the broken girl who had fled that party in tears. I had learned from Dad's own playbook, and there were still moves he had not anticipated. The game was not over. It was time to play by his rules. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Just when Dad's counterattack had nearly destroyed us, a new ally emerged with evidence so damning that it would make his previous crimes look like parking violations. I was packing my belongings, preparing to leave Portland and accept defeat when Ruby received a phone call that changed everything. "There is someone here to see you," Ruby announced, her voice filled with cautious hope. "She says she has information about your father that could end this." Standing in the doorway was a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, but with the hardened expression of someone who had survived real adversity. She introduced herself as Catherine Walsh, Dad's first wife before my mother, a woman whose existence had been completely erased from our family history. "I have been watching this case unfold from across the country," Catherine explained, setting a thick briefcase on Ruby's dining table. "Richard destroyed my life 30 years ago, and I have been waiting for the right moment to destroy his." Catherine's story was horrifying. Dad had not only cheated on her, but had systematically stolen her inheritance, manipulated her into signing over property rights while she was grieving her parents' deaths, and then had her committed to a psychiatric facility when she threatened to expose his schemes. "I spent 6 months in that place while he liquidated everything I owned." Catherine continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "When I was released, I had nothing. No money, no property, no credibility. Everyone believed I was mentally unstable because that was the story he told." But Catherine had done something that would prove invaluable. She had secretly recorded conversations with Dad during their marriage, documenting his early criminal activities and his plans for building his empire through corruption. "I knew Richard was dangerous, so I started recording our conversations for my own protection," she explained, producing a collection of audio devices and transcripts. "I have him confessing to insurance fraud, tax evasion, and bribery schemes dating back to the 1990s. The recordings were devastating. Dad's voice, younger but unmistakably arrogant, bragged about bribing building inspectors and falsifying safety reports. He discussed plans for stealing from business partners and manipulating city contracts. Most damaging of all, he detailed how he planned to use my mother's insurance money to fund his lifestyle while keeping me ignorant of my inheritance. He called it his retirement fund," Catherine said, playing one particularly damning recording. "Listen to this part where he talks about your mother." Dad's voice filled the room. "The best part about marrying Sarah is her life insurance policy. $500,000 that the kid will never see because I will be managing it until she turns 21. By then, it will be long gone, invested in our future. She will never be smart enough to figure it out." Agent Chen arrived within an hour of Catherine's revelation. The federal investigation, which had been weakening due to Dad's counterattacks, suddenly gained overwhelming momentum with this new evidence. "These recordings predate all the witness intimidation," Agent Chen explained excitedly. "They cannot be dismissed as fabricated evidence or coached testimony. This is your father, in his own words, confessing to crimes spanning 3 decades. Catherine had more than just recordings. She had kept copies of financial documents from their divorce, including bank records showing the first instances of Dad's money laundering schemes. She had photographs of meetings with city officials, business cards from the shell companies Dad created, and correspondence with lawyers who had helped him intimidate previous victims. "I never remarried, never had children, never built a new life," Catherine explained. "For 30 years, I have dedicated myself to documenting Richard's crimes and waiting for the right opportunity to bring him down. This case gave me that opportunity." Elena, who had been devastated by the collapse of our alliance, returned with renewed determination after meeting Catherine. Together, they began reconstructing our case with evidence that could not be intimidated, bought, or discredited. "We do not need the witnesses who abandoned us," Elena realized. "Catherine's recordings prove everything we were trying to prove through testimony. Dad confessed to his crimes in his own words. Catherine also brought connections that Dad had not anticipated, She had maintained relationships with victims from Dad's early career, people who had been destroyed so long ago that he had forgotten about them. These victims had evidence dating back decades, establishing a pattern of criminal behavior that made current charges much more credible. Marcus Rivera jumped back onto our side enthusiastically when Catherine provided him with exclusive access to the recordings. His editors could not suppress a story this significant, especially when it involved audio evidence that Dad could not deny or discredit. "This is the smoking gun we needed," Marcus explained during our interview. Richard Walsh confessing to crimes in his own voice, recorded by his own wife. There is no defense against this. The legal momentum shifted dramatically in our favor. David Kim, working with Catherine's evidence, filed new charges that included conspiracy fraud and racketeering violations stretching back 30 years. The federal prosecutors, armed with irrefutable evidence, increased Dad's potential prison sentence to over 50 years. But Catherine's most devastating revelation came when she produced evidence that Dad had been planning to flee the country. "I have been monitoring his financial activities through contacts in the banking industry," Catherine revealed. "Richard has been moving money to offshore accounts in preparation for disappearing. He planned to abandon Linda and the children once the heat became too intense." Bank records showed millions of dollars being transferred to accounts in countries without extradition treaties. Dad had obtained false identity documents and purchased property in remote locations. He was not fighting our charges because he believed he could win. He was buying time to escape justice permanently. Agent Chin immediately moved to freeze Dad's assets and revoke his passport. Federal marshals placed him under constant surveillance to prevent flight attempts. The man who had spent decades destroying other people's lives suddenly found himself trapped by the same legal system he had corrupted. Richard Walsh thought he was above the law because he had been bribing law enforcement for decades, Agent Chin announced during a press conference. These new recordings prove that his criminal enterprise was far more extensive than we initially realized. Catherine's evidence also implicated several city officials and business partners who had escaped initial scrutiny. The corruption investigation expanded to include a former mayor, 2 city council members, and the entire planning commission. Dad's empire was not just crumbling, it was being systematically dismantled piece by piece. Linda Madison and Trevor found themselves facing new charges as the scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. Catherine's recordings proved they had been knowingly benefiting from criminal proceeds for years, making them accessories to Dad's crimes. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," Catherine said during our final planning meeting. "I waited 30 years for this moment, but watching Richard finally face consequences for his crimes makes every year of suffering worthwhile." As we prepared for Dad's trial, I realized that Catherine had given us something more valuable than evidence. She had shown us how to survive Dad's attempts at destruction and emerge stronger. Her patience, determination, and refusal to give up had created the opportunity for justice that none of us could have achieved alone. The student had become the teacher, and it was time for the final lesson. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became the most watched criminal case in our state's history. Every day brought new revelations about the depth of Dad's corruption, and every day brought me closer to the peace I had been seeking since that devastating birthday party. Catherine's recordings played constantly in the courtroom, Dad's own voice convicting him more effectively than any prosecutor could. His lawyers tried claiming the recordings were illegally obtained, but federal judges ruled that a wife recording conversations with her husband in their own home was perfectly legal. The most powerful moment came when Catherine took the witness stand and played the recording where Dad bragged about stealing my mother's insurance money. He said the best part about marrying Sarah was her life insurance policy. Catherine testified, her voice strong and clear. $500,000 that Seraphina would never see because he planned to steal it and use it for his own purposes. I watched Dad's face crumble as his own words echoed through the courtroom. For the first time in my life, I saw him look genuinely afraid. The man who had called me worthless was finally facing the consequences of his choices, and everyone could see exactly who the real, worthless person had always been. Linda Madison and Trevor sat in the defendant section, their perfect facade finally shattered. Linda's designer clothes could not hide her desperation as federal prosecutors detailed how she had knowingly participated in money laundering schemes. Madison and Trevor looked like lost children finally understanding that their privileged lifestyle had been built on other people's suffering. The victim impact statements were devastating. Elena spoke for the construction workers who had been cheated out of wages and benefits. Maria Rodriguez described how Dad's cost-cutting measures had killed her husband and left her family in poverty. James Morrison, his conscience finally clear after confessing his betrayal, detailed how Dad had manipulated him into betraying our alliance by threatening his granddaughter. When my turn came to address the court, I looked directly at Dad and spoke the words I had been rehearsing for months. You told me I was worthless at my 21st birthday party. You threw my gift on the floor and humiliated me in front of everyone whose opinion you valued. That night, you thought you had broken me forever. I paused, letting the silence build. But you were wrong. Your cruelty did not break me. It freed me. It freed me from the illusion that you were someone worth respecting. It freed me from caring about your approval. Most importantly, it freed me to discover who I really am, when I am not trying to please someone who is incapable of love. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Dad was found guilty on all 27 counts of fraud, embezzlement, bribery, tax evasion, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. At 62 years old, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Linda received 15 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Madison and Trevor, as minors during most of their father's crimes, received probation, but were required to forfeit all assets purchased with criminal proceeds, including their college funds, cars, and jewelry. The civil asset forfeiture was equally satisfying. The mansion I had grown up in was sold with proceeds going to Dad's victims. Linda's jewelry collection was auctioned to fund medical care for workers injured by Dad's negligent construction practices. Even Madison's designer handbags were liquidated to help pay restitution. The recovered insurance money, my mother's final gift to me, totaled over $800,000 with interest and penalties. Instead of keeping it all, I established the Sarah Walsh Foundation to provide legal assistance for families fighting corporate corruption and insurance fraud. But the most meaningful transformation was personal. Ruby officially adopted me as her daughter, giving me the family relationship I had always craved. Catherine became my mentor and business partner as we expanded our foundation to help other victims of financial fraud. Elena and I started a construction company focused on ethical practices and worker safety. We hired many of the skilled workers Dad had blacklisted over the years, giving them the opportunity to rebuild their careers with dignity. Marcus Rivera won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative series on the Walsh construction scandal. He continued working with our foundation to expose corruption in other industries and communities. Even James Morrison found redemption. His granddaughter received the surgery she needed through our foundation's medical assistance program, and James became one of our most effective advocates for protecting families from financial predators. 6 months after Dad's sentencing, I visited him in federal prison. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by orange clothing and institutional food. When he saw me approaching, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before: genuine remorse. "Seraphina," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right to ask, but can you ever forgive me?" I studied his face for a long moment, remembering the arrogant man who had destroyed my birthday gift and called me worthless. That man was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the consequences of his choices. "I forgive you, Dad," I said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because forgiveness frees me from carrying your poison anymore. You spent decades trying to convince me I was worthless, but you were describing yourself. As I walked away from that prison, I felt the final weight of his influence lift from my shoulders. The broken girl who had fled that birthday party was truly gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who chose to love her. Today, the Sarah Walsh Foundation has helped recover over $10 million for fraud victims across the country. Our construction company employs over 200 workers who receive full benefit safety training and respect for their contributions. Ruby and I host family dinners every Sunday, joined by Catherine, Elena, and all the other people who became my chosen family through this journey. Sometimes people ask if I regret the years I lost to Dad's manipulation or the pain of discovering the truth about my family. The answer is always no. Those experiences taught me that worth is not determined by other people's opinions, that justice sometimes requires patience and planning, and that the best families are often the ones we choose rather than the ones we inherit. The girl Dad called worthless built something more valuable than his empire ever was, a life based on truth, integrity, and genuine relationships. And unlike his stolen fortune, nobody can ever take that away from me. So here is my question for all of you watching. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a lie? How did you handle learning that everything you believed about your family was wrong? Share your stories in the comments below, because these experiences connect us and remind us that we are not alone in facing betrayal and rebuilding our lives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and finding justice. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they can survive betrayal and emerge stronger than ever. Thank you for watching my journey from worthless daughter to justice warrior. Remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you. It is determined by how you choose to respond when they reveal who they really are. Keep fighting for truth, keep building chosen families, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than respect and love. Until next time, this is Seraphina, reminding you that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you could never be.